Good afternoon. In lieu of doing Facebook Live this week, we are going for a pre-recorded video because that seems to work a bit better with our Wi-Fi and with text viewing. This video is looking at room 2 of our Something Must Be Done Bold Women of Lexington exhibit, now on view to no one at the moment, to everyone virtually now on the second floor of Buckman Tavern. This is a really great text panel because it talks about the connection between what we do normally, which is April 19, 1775 Rev War stuff, and what we're able to do in this exhibit. A story well known in this area is the story of Jonathan Harrington, the fifer in the Lexington militia. In the early morning hours, as the British troops approached and the town started to wake up, Abigail Harrington awakened her 16-year-old son, Jonathan, fifer in the Lexington militia. Later in life, he recalled the moment. "Jonathan, Jonathan," she shouted, "the regulars are coming, and something must be done." More than 100 years after the battle, her words became the rallying cry for Lexington suffragists. So as we go into room 2, hopefully you can see the text. And this is a section where we talk about mostly the 19th century in Lexington. The dawn of the 19th century saw the Second Great Awakening, a religious revival that infused women with a new moral fervor. At the same time, more women were receiving an education, going to work, and living independently. So the issues of slavery, temperance, women's rights became larger and larger, and women in Lexington rolled up their sleeves and did something. There's a quote there from Eliza Lee Khabit Fallen, who was married to Lexington Minister Charles Fallen, and was an abolitionist in very much her own right. You can actually see her photograph right over there to the left. We're going to look at her in a second. But she says, "Women have a right to be heard, for they are all sufferers. The abolition of slavery is indeed women's work." So one of the first sections we have here is about the Lexington Female Charitable Society. It was the first activist women organization in Lexington, founded in 1833. However, it disbanded in 1841 because there were, quote, "so few persons who stand in need of assistance in this place." This was a town that did not have a lot of need for help because it has always been a fairly wealthy town, fairly well off in terms of land and farming and things like that in the 19th century. Founding members of the Lexington Female Charitable Society, however, included Hannah Simons Robbins, who we will learn about a little more later in her abolition, standing up for abolition, and Mariah Hastings Carrie, who later financed the library and other projects. The young lady in the middle there with the big hat and the small frame is Alice Butler Carey. She is the daughter of Mariah Carey. We'll learn a little bit more about them in a second, but basically she was around later on, about 1906, and she was able to give money towards the library, the Carey Library in town, which still has a very similar portico now, beautiful fieldstone. And Mariah Hastings Carrie helped found the library, and her daughter Alice helped build the new building. So philanthropic women were sort of the start of some of our activism here in Lexington. We move on to things like anti-slavery. As I said, women in this area could not vote or own property. So how did they accomplish political change? One of the few ways they could was signing petitions. At least 10 anti-slavery petitions went around Lexington during the 1850s. One of the interesting parts as well, as you can see from some of these examples here, is that there are 2 columns. One column is for legal voters. The other column is for others. Most of the others are, of course, women and or African American men, if they were not enslaved at this time. Some were, some weren't. This one, too, does not, say legal voters, other persons. So even so, kind of how do you think it would feel to sign this petition as another person? It kind of drives home the fact that both black people of all genders and women are not allowed, of all colors, were not allowed to vote themselves. As we know, slavery was not abolished until the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865. But as I said, abolition was an early cause around here. The Robbins family, who I mentioned before, Hannah Simons Robbins up there on the right-hand side, that is actually a enlargement of a miniature that was done by Rufus Porter of her and her husband and other relatives. Her daughters, Julia Robbins Barrett and Ellen Robbins Stone, and Ellen's daughter, Ellen Adelia Stone. And basically their stories show how the anti-slavery movement was a training ground for women who would come to believe that voting and property ownership were basic human rights. So we have more stories about Hannah Simons Robbins. We're not going to go through all of these cards. Today we have these awesome profile cards with a profile of each woman. However, we do have the file. We have all these images with all the information about each of the women on our website, lexingtonhistory.org/current exhibits. Over here, we're going to come back to Eliza Lee Khabit Fallen, teacher, poet, essayist, editor, and abolitionist. She mentored her husband Charles when he first arrived from Germany. They moved to Lexington to found a church prompted by the Robbins family. Charles passed away and was actually never able to serve as the minister, but Eliza stood up as a powerful voice urging women to advocate for abolition. And over here we have a little bit of the story. Lexington by no means led the charge to dismantle slavery. William Lloyd Garrison and the Liberator specifically said, Lexington's not really doing its job on this, but there are a few choice anti-slavery spirits in Lexington, largely from East Lexington and many women. There was a lot of drama about having Fallen come because he was very fiery and radical, as it says right there in the text, a fiery radical from Germany. And the women in the church basically envisioned a non-sectarian congregation, so no religious affiliation necessarily, where things like abolition and temperance, which were very controversial topics at that time. And eventually the church, after Fallen's death, became part of the United Universalist organization, and so unfortunately, Unitarianism, Unitarists. So unfortunately, we weren't able to. So we think probably Julia Robbins Barrett wrote this: Lords of East Lexington, priests of Unitarianism, step forward and take the control. Then the free Christian church is forgotten and sectarian Unitarianism prevails. Anti-slavery intents are actually pushed out. Not even a notice can be read. So a lot of the early abolition coming from Fallen was sort of before this period when we were ramping up, when the Robbins women and others were ramping up to receive Charles Fallen. And unfortunately that didn't work out, but at least we have that early element. Over here, let's learn a little more about Mariah Hastings Carrie. This is Mariah Hastings Carrie over here on the right. Now, she's the one I mentioned before who helped build the library. She, in 1868, gave the town $1,000, the equivalent of nearly $20,000, if it was this year, to establish a free library and challenged the town residents to match the contribution. Followed up with additional donations for the library, and she helped paid for the new town hall, which was there before Carrie Hall in 1928. And then, of course, her family also helped give some money towards the new building, which is now Carrie Memorial Hall. I believe it was her brother-in-law. A quarter century, as I said, her daughter, Alice Butler Carrie, little lady with the big hat, funded the construction of a new library in 1906. We have a photograph actually here, a younger photograph of Alice Butler Carrie. We don't have a lot of physical items on Mariah Hastings Carrie. If you go to the Carrie Memorial Library website, they have wonderful, obviously the library itself is not open right now, but they've had amazing virtual programs, and they've got a great special collection search where you can look through items. And there's really, as I've learned by talking to librarians, not a lot that physically belonged to Mariah, but her money basically made the library happen, so we are forever grateful. This is another woman who we love. She was a very bold woman. She didn't fit in necessarily with political movements, but she was amazing, and we love her, and she was bold as heck. So she's in the exhibit. She was an Army nurse in 2 wars. Her nephew, James Finney Monroe, published a diary as a book, and she inspired the character Mary Finney. If any of you watched the PBS series Mercy Street in 2016 and 17, blanking on the name of the actress, but the main female lead was based on Mary Finney. Unfortunately, they made her from Concord, which is not accurate, but she was very much from Lexington. Her father, Elias Finney, was a very big agriculturalist. He was one of the first commuters. He used to ride his carriage from Lexington into Cambridge every day. But he had massive fields here in Lexington and was early on involved in the Mass Horticultural Society and other agricultural organizations. Mary, going back to Mary, she worked in Lexington, grew up in Lexington, worked as a textile designer, and became friends with a gentleman named Gustav von Olnhausen when she worked in the mills in Manchester, and ended up marrying him. After his untimely death, his early death from disease, and after nursing him through that, she volunteered as a nurse for the Union Army during the Civil War. She also went over to Europe during the Franco-Prussian War at age 52. In part it was because she had family over there from her late husband's family was over, I believe, in Germany. So she was able to at least see them and stay with them some of the time. But for her efforts, she actually got an Iron Cross from Kaiser Wilhelm I. So pretty cool, actually. And yes, in answer to your question, we do have her Iron Cross. It's right here. Sorry, I'm blocking it there. There we go. So that's the Iron Cross. The left is a General Service Medal, the middle is the Iron Cross, and then the right is a Special Medal for non-combatants. But she earned all three of those medals as a nurse in the war. We also have a couple other cool things from her here. This is her Berlin, Germany Red Cross certificate from 1870, and her certificate from Alexandria, Virginia in 1863. I do like this thing about her, too. So she received the Iron Cross. At age 84, she wore it to a Boston reception for Prince Henry of Germany, and newspapers picked up the story called "A Little Madam of the Iron Cross." I love her analysis of the situation. She says, "Nothing like being the fad for a while. I've waited 40 years, and now when I'm so old, it comes all at once." So let's move away from Mary and Mariah and into suffrage, because suffrage is pretty amazing around here. This is a timeline that we created, which is actually really amazing. And this is a document that I'm actually going to put on our website soon. Remember, www.lexingtonhistory.org/current exhibits. This is a full timeline of suffrage on the national, state, Lexington, and Wellington family level. The Wellington family up here. Again, this is also going to be on the website in the profiles. We have Caroline, Eliza, Emily, and Louise. Or Louisa, as she was sometimes called. Very involved. Descended from Benjamin Wellington, Samuel Hastings, militia members in the battle, and they really, really were committed to the suffrage cause. For more than 65 years, they were involved in this process. And as you can see by some of those dates, those death dates, 1916, 1912, 1850, 1924, only one of these four women lived to actually be able to vote. So that's pretty amazing to think about someone like Caroline Wellington, who lived a very long life, 1820, 1916. She was 94 when she died, but she still just missed actually getting to vote herself or to experience women having the right to vote. So as I said, I will post this document on our website, but it's a great timeline showing how early we were involved. National Women's Rights Convention is Seneca Falls in 1848, Worcester 1850. Down here in 1850, Caroline Wellington, Eliza, and Emily were petitioning as early as 1850. And then there's a bit of a gap. Then we get into the post-war years and things just kind of ramp up from there. This is one of our favorite stories. Then 1887, the Women's Suffrage League, Lexington Women's Suffrage League, becomes a chapter of the Massachusetts Women's Suffrage Association. President is Louise, and Caroline and Emily are officers. The Wellington Women and others on the banner committee make this banner, which was first displayed at the Boston Suffrage Bazaar in 1887. Then, after appearing in many other bazaars and things, in 1912, 92-year-old Caroline Wellington and her 78-year-old sister Louise, oh, excuse me, I was wrong about that. Caroline was 94 when she died. 92 in this. Her 78-year-old sister Louise, the sisters present the organization with the banner made in 1887. So basically there's an earlier organization, the Lexington Women's Suffrage League. Then the Lexington Equal Suffrage Association is formed in 1900, including William Lloyd Garrison's son. And then in 1912, the old guard passes the banner on to the new guard. As you can see, the banner's also over here. March 3rd, 1913, displayed at the Women's Suffrage Procession, the first ever suffragist parade in Washington, D.C. And guess what? That's that event. Ta-da! That's the 1913 Women's suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. That is the Lexington contingent with their Massachusetts scarves. Excuse me, not scarves. I'm blanking on the word. We're going to ignore that for now. And then there's that banner up there in the right-hand corner, 1887 and Lexington. And a lot of other things. You can see there's Women's Suffrage League letters and the town seal. And then the phrase down there, which is probably hard to see, but as we get closer you can see, something must be done. And when we found out that this photograph existed, and this is on loan, or we're using it under the auspices of the Schlesinger Library on the history of women in America at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard University. Thank you to them for the loan of the photograph, or the use of the photograph. And once we found it, we thought, wow, that's a really cool photograph. And someone local agreed with us. Jesse Steigerwald, a Lexington resident, was already planning on doing a recreation of that suffrage photograph, which we can post on our website. We posted on social media back in March when it happened. And she made us this replica banner of the one that was done before. It is beautiful. It is wonderful. It's a great interpretation of it. She spent a lot of time researching it, and we're very grateful to her work. This was our dress-up corner, so we've got some hats and scarves, shawls. Nope, that's not the right word either. I'll think of it eventually. Sashes, there we go. All right, there's sashes, which are available for use, but of course, no one's touching them right now, nor should they be. So a little bit more about Lexington Women. We talked a little bit about that story on the right over here about the banner. But then Florence Livingston Lent, who was also a Lexington woman who did not survive for actual suffrage. She died in 1917, right up there. But she wrote the lyrics to a rousing new suffrage song, sung by a chorus of 200 people at the 1914 suffrage parade in Boston. Then they sold the sheet music to raise money, and then they sold suffrage. Lent took up selling suffrage fund coffee, which is kind of cool. This was not a joyous occasion at all times. There were definitely women who were not interested in all women having the right to vote. Passionate women in Lexington on both sides. The Massachusetts Association opposed to the further extension of suffrage to women, was organized in 1894 and had a Lexington chapter. And the Equal Suffrage Organization prompted the formation of the Lexington AntiSuffrage Society. So there's definitely people who are not interested. It's a thought question to think about why might some women have opposed giving all women the vote. But we also have some more petitions, sort of the legal side of things over here. And again, you can see we've got these petitions with voter up there, and non-voter right there. So all the names are non-voters. This is a ledger of meeting minutes from the LESCA, the Lexington Equal Suffrage Association. And a few things on loan. This remonstrance against women's suffrage was the newsletter of one of the the Massachusetts anti-suffrage organizations. That was in our collection. It was one of the 2 items in our collection about suffrage. And these are some cool postcards on loan from a Lexington resident, Leslie Masson, and they are, samples of postcards from different places, Chicago, London, etc., looking at how women might change things up a little, either be the ones pushing the cart, or dad's taking care of the kids, or mom's coming home when the milk van comes home. So we'll go with our next room next week. There's a lot of cool stuff in there, but in the meantime, we're pretty excited about the 19th century in Lexington. This banner, the suffrage information that we found out, all of it came together really beautifully, and we're very happy with all of it. So hope you all had a great afternoon. Like I said, all of this information, or a lot of this information, will be available soon, if not now, on our website at lexingtonhistory.org/current exhibits. We are working hard behind the scenes to try to create content. We've got an announcement later on this week about how you might be able to access our historic properties soon. And in the meantime, we just want to thank you for your support over these unusual times. And if you're interested in supporting us any further, lexingtonhistory.org/give. Any donation is appreciated. Thanks very much and have a great day.